Good morning. Graham Wright, the member for Durrington and Larkhill, and also chair of this Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee meeting. Welcome you to the meeting of the 15th of November 2022. First on the agenda, Ben, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair. So apologies have been received from Councillor Bob Jones, MBE. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ben. Agenda item 2 is minutes of the previous meeting. Will I be raise of hands for those who are happy with the minutes from last time? Yes.
We used to have present and in attendance. Have we gone away from that, or does it matter, or doesn't it matter?
What with the two distinguished in the minutes?
Yeah, but these, I think effectively, committee members were present and anybody else was in attendance. That's my memory, and it may be that my memory is poor, and it may be that it doesn't matter. But
We may well have had that, and I think it relates to our committee management system likes to differentiate. Whether we need to differentiate, I'll check that out. I'll come back to you.
Thank you, Tony, however. Good point. Okay, so I will sign those at a later date, if I may. Declarations of interest. Anybody have any declarations of interest? If you do during the meeting, by all means, raise your hand. Okay, and now we move on to the chairman's announcements. Don't have anything other than to say welcome to Pip, who's come back. This is her first meeting, and we welcome you back, Pip, with open arms. I also want to move on to financial training for members, which actually relates back to Pip as well. Following the finance overview training provided by Offers in September, we now have a date for the training specifically on members' role in conducting effective and strategic financial scrutiny. The training will be delivered by the Central Centre for Governance and Scrutiny on Thursday the 24th, that's next week, and the session will be at 2 p.m. It will be in person. It's aimed particularly at members of this committee. So if anybody hasn't signed up yet, please consider doing so. Be appreciated. We'll have members of the Financial Planning Task Group, and I encourage you to attend. And if you would like to, please confirm with Simon Bennett, the Senior Scrutiny Officer, or any member of the Scrutiny team. If any issues, just talk to Henry before the meeting concludes. Thank you. For anybody who missed the original training in September, that is on a video on the Councillors Hub. If anybody needs a link, just come back to me and I'll provide it. In addition, we're also scheduling a session for scrutiny questioning skills, also to be delivered by the Centre of Governance and Scrutiny. The date for that will be confirmed shortly. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 5, which is public participation. We have received no questions or statements from the public for this particular meeting. Okay, I'd now like to, between agenda items 5 and 6, I'd like to slip Perry Holmes in the nicest possible way. Perry's got some news that he would like to talk to us about, or not. I won't say too much. I'll give you the floor, Perry.
Well, Chair, through you, I think you wanted to give me the opportunity just to feedback a little bit about the Corporate Peer Challenge. So firstly, thanks to yourself and your fellow chairs of scrutiny committees who were interviewed as part of that. Just to give members, just to remind members, we had a Corporate Peer Challenge team in last week. They engaged with, they told us, 180 councillors, officers and partners across 3.5 days, collectively spending 200 hours to arrive at their findings, which was the equivalent, they told us, of one person spending, how lovely, 5 weeks in Wiltshire Council. The feedback on specifically on governance, so was in the key line of inquiry called governance and culture, and they told us this, on Friday. Councillor Bottrell was there, myself and Andy also, that there was impressive organisational governance, providing good levels of rigour and consistency in corporate decision making, so that was very positive. Good governance arrangements continue to be developed for Stone Circle. Scrutiny is well resourced and members feel they are able to challenge There are effective mechanisms in place to coordinate activity on an annual basis between scrutiny and the Cabinet. There is balance between overview and scrutiny, small o, small s, but also a recognition from members that they could continue to develop the value they add through engagement in the early stages of policy formation. So those were four of the statements. There were a shed load of other things that were shared back to the council, and we'll see a report with some detail around this we're expecting it now in the new year, and obviously at that point we'll be pulling together, we'll be looking at the recommendations that they do give. I suspect there won't be any around governance or scrutiny, but there may be, and then obviously we'll be bringing that here for you to consider. So I think all in all, and the overall theme, I have to tell you, was a very positive one. By the time the inspectors are asking to copy things we do here, you know that they are seeing a well-run local authority, and that was the feedback that we got. But specifically on scrutiny, well-resourced, and members feel that they are able to challenge, and I think that probably rings true for members today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Perry, and we have on our forward work programme for January, our January meeting, we should have the full report. Do you have any, obviously not about the report because it's not been written, but do we have any questions of Perry at all or any comments want to be made? I found the experience very useful. It was very relaxed. Anybody else want to chip in at all? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Perry. Let's move on then to agenda item 6, Finance, Corporate Resources and Organisational Scrutiny Update. Page 17 of the agenda pack, we have a report providing an update on the changes to ONS's approach to engaging with financial, corporate and organisational matters. This follows our discussion back in May when we agreed a number of changes and said we would review the arrangements in 6 months' time. So here we are. I'm going to ask Henry. Henry wrote the report within the details, so I'll ask Henry to introduce it, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the report is structured around the 6 resolutions that you agreed back in May, and they're presented in a table from page 2. If I just run through those quickly, I won't read them out, but I'll touch on each one. So your first resolution was that this committee would receive the key financial reports after the Financial Planning Task Group, which they were already doing, and accordingly you have been doing that. So in July and September, you received the budget updates. It was unfortunate at this meeting we're not quite in line with the Cabinet timescale because Cabinet moved for various reasons. So in order to kind of replace that, all members of this committee have been invited to the Financial Planning Task Group's meeting next Friday when those reports will be discussed, and that meeting's been expanded. It's slightly longer to enable a fuller discussion. As you'd expect from our next meeting, you'll continue to receive those reports, and in January, as always, on the work programme is the annual council budget and the Treasury Management Strategy Statement. Moving on to resolution 2, so it was noted that the select committee should retain their ability to query and flag significant financial concerns about anything they discuss, and they've been doing that. And also the Financial Planning Task Group are holding a series of meetings in November and December focusing on key budget areas, and the chairs and vice chairs of the relevant select committees have been invited and are encouraged to attend those. And I think we're also having some informal meetings to prepare for those. Resolution 3 was to look into greater scrutiny engagement on other corporate and organisational matters, so beyond finance. And looking back at the forward work programme, you've actually looked at quite a bit. You've looked at the Council Performance and Risk Report, the Annual Complaints Report, the Asset Transfer and Service Devolution Policy, and on your agenda today we have the Socially Responsible Procurement Policy. Very shortly, we will have meetings in the diary between the Councillor Wright and the Cabinet member equivalents for ICT and digital transformation and finance, and no doubt that will add further issues onto the work programme. Number 4, the chairman and vice chairman were asked to come back with proposals around scrutiny of council performance and risk. And essentially, the approach that's been taken is that this committee receives the quarterly performance and risk reports to Cabinet, And the other select committees have made their own arrangements to conduct slightly more detailed scrutiny. And I think Health and Children's have established task groups to do that. Resolution 5 is about the Financial Planning Task Group's responsibilities around contract scrutiny. This is something we're still working on, and we want to get this right because it's about setting an appropriate minimum value for a contract that requires dedicated financial scrutiny, because we don't want the task group to be looking at every contract necessarily, because that's probably too much work. So it's setting an appropriate amount and also agreeing the appropriate time in the lifetime of a contract for the task group to get involved, because it's not necessarily when a report comes to Cabinet. So that might be something for the task group to discuss at its next meeting next week. And finally, Resolution 6 was about arranging appropriate training for members to undertake effective finance scrutiny. So as the Chair has already said, we've had some training looking at finance in general and the Council's budget. And next week we have dedicated training on conducting finance scrutiny. And we also have a further session that will look at effective questioning in general. So that's a summary of the report, and I'm very happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
I'll just add that it's been very professional transfer of this work. So far, it's all going well. But having said that, I will open it up, obviously, to questions. Does anybody have any questions directly on this? Yes, John.
Thank you, Chair. It's just picking up on one point. I think it was the 4th resolution that you were just talking about then, but this was about setting a minimum value for the contracts to be scrutinised. I think that the one thing we need to bear in mind is as you look at the different areas of work within the council, the value of a contract and the impact it would have on a service will vary dramatically. So if we were taking a mean average across the whole council, you're going to be skewed quite a bit because things like highway contracts that the Environment Committee would perhaps be looking at, there were tens of millions, maybe more, whereas when you come into things like children's services, where we've got much smaller contracts but that have quite significant impact, then they will, what I wouldn't want is us to set a limit and say below this level, we don't think we should be scrutinising these contracts. That actually means that for whole swathes of work that the council does, we would never be looking at something which actually we probably should be looking at.
Yeah, no, I'm going to bring Henry in, but I know there's a common sense approach to it, so it won't be absolutely tantamount to a particular level. If there is an implication on something, then we'll be looking. But I'll let Henry answer.
Yeah, so this proposal, it related purely to the financial scrutiny of contracts. So we're not proposing a limit to what select committees look at, because obviously, as you say, a contract might be very important operationally, but not a big value contract. This is purely the contracts that are significant financially, and whether the finance task group should look at them.
Can I just come back? I'm sorry, just because obviously I've triggered something here and I just want to make sure. But again, when you're looking financially at it, if the council's only spending £500,000 on a particular service and that's going out amongst 3 contracts, okay, they may not be financially significant in terms of compared with a highways contract or whatever, but they are significant according to those services, and we should be looking at them at the beginning, not at the end, as to whether it's right or wrong. And colleagues from Children's Select may know a little of what I'm going on about at the moment, although there's news for them on that. So I just worry that we mustn't just look at this in financial terms, and we've got to give some flexibility to the financial task group, but perhaps also to the select committees or chairs of select committees to work with the chair of the financial task group to say, we'd really like this one to be looked at, even though it's below your notional threshold.
I can guarantee we'd be able to do that, but Andy would like to just make a comment.
Yeah, I think we're probably singing from the same hymn sheet. That's exactly what we're trying to do. I know Pip's just is desperate to come in as well. This was more about the financial scrutiny. This doesn't this doesn't remove the select committee's ability to go in and be involved in those contracts at an early stage on any value, because the financial scrutiny being set in terms of that minimum is going through the financial planning task group. Exactly what you did describe, John. That can still come through the select committee process, and that will be up for the select committees to determine that in terms of their forward work plan. So we're not taking that away, and that's still going to be there. So I think we are speaking from the same hymn sheet, as it were.
Thanks. Before I bring you in, Pip, I'll let you summarise everything, and as you're the guardian of our finances, we'll let you come in last to sum up. Yes, Tony.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I suppose this has implications on agenda item 8, with the procurement policy, because what I'm concerned about is that there could be financial implications to any of that. So when you're looking at a task group looking into the financial issue of purchasing, products, and if we are to follow the policy that is shown on agenda item 8, we may have questions to answer, to ask when we get to that point. But it's the financial issue which I'm concerned about on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and actually that's exactly the point I've got on agenda item 8, but we'll wait till we get to agenda item 8. Okay. Right, Pip, if you could summarise how you see the reworking of the allocation of responsibilities, I'd be appreciative. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And we haven't arrived at this without a lot of discussion, even though I haven't been present. I think John is quite right. You cannot just... Obviously, the select committees will look at it operationally, but they have to bear in mind the financial things. And also, one thing that John didn't mention is some of the contracts have savings in, which, like the highways contract, and that requires monitoring. That came out of the meeting we had Friday on environment with Jerry, Councillor Kunkler. So it's much broader than just saying, oh, well, we'll set a limit. And there are so many things to be considered and monitored ongoing, especially when you get to the budget or something like that. The chairs will have to remember when they get to the budget that there are certain savings targets in some of these contracts that must be monitored or questioned. So I think it's going from just Friday's meeting, and it's John tomorrow and Johnny next week. We're trialling Q1, which has been, obviously, we're past the time, because next week, the week after, we get Q2, which is when we always do some intense monitoring. And I think the way we're going is right, to transfer it over slowly, because you yourself as ONS have certain things like corporate costs that you have to monitor. It's not just the 3 select committees. And on procurement, I entirely agree. You can't set a limit. It's all about what contracts they're getting into for goods and services that need monitoring, and whether you set a value for that. I mean, one doesn't want to be petty, but on the other hand, it could go hopelessly wrong. So I agree entirely with what John and Tony have said, and the way we go is slowly catchy monkey and see how it all works out until we get the budget.
Thank you,
Chair.
Pip. And I'm sure that I can rely on you to flag up any issues if they should arise between now and Q2 figures. Great. Gavin, I don't know if you did want to say anything. You've been, you've held the fort with Pip over a difficult few months. Did you want to add anything? Please feel welcome to.
Well, firstly, can I join in the committee's celebration of the physical return of Pip to our meetings. I can assure you she has been omnipresent in spirit, if not in actuality. in our virtual meetings of the financial planning task group. What I would add and underline, Chairman, because we've had discussions with you and with the relevant committee chairs, is this is a very significant change. And it will be a significant change in terms of the agendas of your committee here, and indeed, I think of the agendas of the committees, the standing committees of the council. And I think that was very apparent in our discussions, the first set of discussions with Councillor Kunkler, that those committees and indeed yourselves have that responsibility of looking at the service performance. And by adding in the financial component here, that is a significant additional piece of work. And therefore, within the setting of your agendas, the timing of your meetings, and I think the frame of reference and thinking around those meetings, it will be important that committee members are, in the right sense, armed for those particular discussions. And that's why, Chairman, we're having this Q1 run through, because I think it shows the levels of activity that are likely to happen and where the emphasis may well lie in terms of the scrutiny that will have to be conducted. Now, for those committees, the standing committees, I think they're almost, if I may, and forgive me for being slightly impertinent, I think they're in a slightly better place than perhaps Overview and Scrutiny Management is, in that they are, under the respective chairs who are around this table, very used, and their vice chairs, very used to examining the performance of those segments of the council's work in terms of the delivery for the electorate and against the plans that were set and the objectives that were set. I'm not aware that Overview and Scrutiny Management have looked at that sort of level at the individual corporate elements that are going to appear before you in terms of financial scrutiny. So that is, for this committee in particular, I think it is quite a major cultural shift. And it may therefore have two elements to it. The one which you're now alluding to, Chairman, which is the financial component of it, but also perhaps having a better understanding of the objectives of those corporate teams and corporate plans as they relate to those financial proposals. So I echo my illustrious chair's views that this is the right way forward, because it has always struck, I think, both Pip and I as odd that there has been that dislocation between service provision performance and the financial budget and financial performance that must inevitably sit alongside it. That is an odd dislocation to take place. But nevertheless, the change is a fairly substantive one. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Gavin, and we are looking forward to the challenge that will exist for Overview and Scrutiny Management, because there is a cultural change that we have to make. But we'll review that at our next meeting. It was interesting at the peer review that the importance of finance was quite clear from the scrutiny members, that we spoke quite a lot about, you know, how there's been a shift from it's all okay, it just works along and budget comes through, to we have issues that we need to look at. So I think we're well and truly focused, at least. Thank you very much. Okay, are there any other questions? If not, I'll move to a proposal, which is to note the update on implementation of the changes to Overview and Scrutiny approach to engaging with financial, corporate and organisational matters, which we agreed in May 2022. And two, to note that all committee members are invited to the next meeting of the Financial Planning Task Group on the 25th of November, where the revenue and capital budget updates will be discussed prior to the Cabinet meeting on the 29th of November. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Chris. All those in favour, please. Anybody against? No, that's carried. Thank you very much indeed. It's rather late in the procedure, Nick, but did you want to comment in any way? No, that's fine. Thank you. Okay, let's move on to agenda item 7, Management Committee Task Groups. On page 23 of the agenda, we have an update on the various task groups, rapid scrutiny and panel activities that sit under the Management Committee. The first update will be of the Swindon and local enterprise partnership. I'm being informed by Henry that this is very much just, how can I say, it's not moved in any way at this moment. I think I'll be polite and say that nobody knows exactly where it's going, but we will get an update at some point. I think Henry is going to go and actually, did you manage to get that update? I'll bring Henry in.
Yeah, so the scrutiny panel is somewhat in abeyance because the LEP itself is somewhat in abeyance, and I think all LEPs await more clarity from government about their future role. So we're waiting to see what happens in terms of the panel and the need for it, because the panel itself is actually commissioned by the LEP. It's not, strictly speaking, one of our task groups. It's a externally commissioned piece of scrutiny that we support.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on now to the Evolve Programme Task Group. They last met. Oh, sorry, Tony.
Thank you, Chair. I know there appears to be a vacancy on the Wiltshire Council list of members. 3 years ago, I did offer myself for this review group or whatever. So if that's in any way helpful, my offer remains open.
That's fine. Because we haven't had any meetings, we haven't advertised, but your name is in the frame should it come to pass, as it were. Thank you, Tony. Yeah. Okay, moving on to the Evolve Programme Task Group. They last met on 30th September. We do have a report, but I'll ask John if there's anything else he wishes to add.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, at that last meeting, as you can see in the report, the news was not what we would always want to hear the news as being. The programme had slipped to red, and there's a real risk that it won't be delivered to schedule. Now, I know there's another programme board meeting happening next week, is it? Friday. And we're meeting again after that. We resolved to meet sooner to look at immediately what happened post that board. But so I wouldn't want to predetermine what comes out at that board in terms of remedial action that's been taken. But to update the committee on where we were last made aware of things, we've not been able to move from data migration 2 to data migration 3 on the programme, which puts at risk the ability of the programme to go live as scheduled. There are some implications to this in terms of licensing, although the SAP license is good until the end of next year. There are various other licenses that would have been being replaced, made no longer necessary, that will expire earlier in the year, potentially March or April, when the new system is due to go live. So there are various works going on and discussions going on with the contractor. I think from the meeting, I don't know if other members would agree, but I think from the meeting, there was an element of not 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, but there were problems on both sides, both council side and the contractor side. Mainly on the council side, the issue has been staffing, and that issue has been twofold. One, in recruiting appropriate staff to be able to undertake the works. That's not necessarily the council's fault. There is a national shortage of specialist people at the moment, and the money that we've been offering or have budgeted to offer just wasn't in line with what people are actually out there able to command at the moment, purely because there just aren't enough of them in anything. But secondly, also, and this is more something for us to consider internally, where we are having to bring people across from the departments to work in the Evolve team to be part of designing and structuring the new system, but the departments don't have the spare staff, the staff available to send over. So we're trying to second people that don't exist into designing a new system that will be running what everyone will be using in 12 months' time. And that is something which we will particularly be focusing on December, I think December the 2nd, when we have our next meeting following the programme board on Friday, to look at how we're digging ourselves out of the challenging position that we're in. I've tried to put that as diplomatically as I can, Andy.
Any questions or comments? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. A very quick question. Have we any indication of how much the programme has slipped by?
I'm going to be reluctant to give you a timeline because I can't remember, to be honest. They were quite open with, in all fairness, they were quite open with us in the meeting. But I think the challenge is that the original plan for the project, and Andy might want to correct me on what I'm about to say because I might be about to dig a big hole for myself. The original plan of the project was to take more of a big bang approach and bring in the whole new Evolve system in March, April next year and just move over. Because we've got slippages in various areas, it's about how you can implement that now and whether it's still a big bang possible or whether we've got to look at it and bring in a phased implementation. Am I still talking sense, Andy?
Yeah, so that's some of the options that we're looking at. So what we've been doing up until this point is effectively replanning, basically exactly what Councillor Hubbard said in terms of the sequential aspects, particularly from data migration. And we are and been asking the questions around how quickly could we get that in. What I've been clear about is that you want to implement a quality product, but also get the processes and the culture changed within the organisation as well. So if we are spending the time and there's been delays in getting the data migration, clearly that is vital, but we can't then shorten the amount of time that we've got for cultural change and process and training, so on and so forth. So to be able to get in a big bang approach, that would mean we would cut corners on other aspects which are equally vitally important. So the replanning phases have happened. We've got a programme board now to receive the outcome of that, and that's what we'll be reporting to the scrutiny group on the 2nd of December as well. So that replanning is looking at the options about when a go live can go, making sure that we've got a quality product to implement, but also gets the organisation fit for purpose on the new processes and culture that needs to change, because the system will only do exactly what you tell it to do. You need to change the way that we currently operate within the SAP system as well as by the time that we're moving to the Oracle, the new Oracle system.
One of the things the task group will be looking at and asking about is cost implications of any such extensions, because if we're having to buy replacement licenses for software that had expired, then and anything else of that ilk, then obviously, and it's who is responsible for those costs.
Thanks, John. I see you've got a nod from Pip there, so that's good. It's another tick. No, it's all right, Pip. I was just going to say, is any questions other than Tony's got his hand up? So Tony, would you like to? Tony Trotman? Sorry, Tony Jackson. My apologies, Ruth, didn't see.
I'm only small, but even so. Yeah, I just want to come back because I'm on the task group with John, and one of the comments rather than a question is this is a massive, massive sea change to the organisation. And when the timescales were set, then we knew right from the start. Ambitious is a good word. And because of the complexities and actually making sure that the staff are involved to ensure that whatever is implemented is actually productive in the long term. The fact that there has been slippage, I don't think has come as a huge shock to anyone. It's unfortunate, but it hasn't come as a huge shock. Picking up on a point that Andy said, one of the discussions we had was, do we try and stick to the timescales that were originally set? And I think there was absolute unanimity from both the officers and the task group that setting an arbitrary timescale, which could mean that what was introduced to the council was not actually functioning properly in the future, was a false economy. So yes, we do need to take account of the financial implications, but actually the financial implications of trying to do it to an arbitrary timescale has potential to be an awful lot more.
Thank you, Ruth. Appreciated. Tony Jackson.
Thanks, Chair. Just a request, if I may. 2 or 3 years ago, the Wiltshire Police separated its IT system from Wiltshire Councils. But at the moment, we can still find police officers, if we know their name, in the directory. Please can that facility still be maintained? Much obliged.
Just, that's got nothing to do with Evolve. That's to do with the Active Directory setup the council operates its networking system. Evolve is basically the account software that the council will be using. So they are two separate systems.
Thanks, John. Yes, Chris.
Thank you, Graham. We've discussed finance side of it, and there's obviously a penalty with the contract side or the licensing side of it. But is there an overall penalty if this does, or it will run over to the budget that was set? Because you're going to have to find the money from somewhere at the end of the day. And I'd hate for the taxpayers of Wiltshire to be forking out more money on this scheme than what we originally planned. Thank you.
Sorry, yes, Andy.
Yeah, so two good questions, and we'll cover those off in a lot more detail in the task group as well. We've been, as the chair's recognised, I think we've been very open and transparent around the problems and headaches that we face. We will be sharing those at the Scrutiny task group on the 2nd of December, and then the position that we agree on Friday about what we're presenting forward as the way forward. But I am expecting some robust challenge around some of those options that we are going to put forward. Part of that is there's two things. One, Evolve, the programme and the implementation of Oracle, should, and certainly the business case around it puts forward benefits that can be realised as savings in the MTFS. Prudently, and in hindsight maybe, when we set the budget last year, I took the decision not to hard code those in to the MTFS. So we've been prudent in that respect in terms of savings that were predicated on the implementation of the new Oracle system haven't yet been hard coded into the MTFS. I do expect those to come forward, because if you're investing over £10 million in terms of an implementation of a new system, you would expect benefits to be materialised, but they're not predicated in the MTFS as yet. And that was because of my concern around the ambitious timescales, the risk around delivery from an April 23 perspective. So if we had hard-coded those into the budget, then yes, we would have a problem, but those aren't. But I'm still expecting them to come forward at some point in time. The other flip side is, I think, is already been mentioned, is what is the cost increase as a result of any delay that comes forward. And so we've got a commercial proposal from our system implementer. We've got then our internal costs, and what does that compare to in terms of the budget that we have approved. Now, we do have a sizable contingency because there is risks around implementing and the complex nature of a program of this type. But how does that compare to the contingency in terms of the replanning that's come through? And so some of that I'm still waiting the answers for. We'll hopefully get those on Friday, and then we can present those to the Scrutiny task group. But there's 2 points there. The savings one hasn't been hard coded, so we won't be bitten, if you like, on that aspect in terms of the timing to deliver savings. But there is potentially a cost factor that needs to be thrown into that in terms of the replanning that we'll then potentially have to come back and talk about an uplift potentially, depending if contingency isn't sufficient to ensure that we continue with the programme.
Thanks, Andy. Yes, John.
Can I just add to that, that I think the members on the task group can reassure you alongside me that we are robustly challenging Stuart and Andy and the team on this matter. But I think what we also need to be is realistic, and there are very few major IT projects of this scale that end up coming in under budget. They do exist, but it's very rare, and this is by no means an NHS job. There are challenges, there are problems with it, but actually when you look back later, I'll tell you what, I was on the SAP group in 2009 when SAP came in on Wiltshire Council and the Performance and Budget Task Group. And one of the things that I think there's a determination to make sure we don't do with this implementation is a repeat of the mistakes that were made with the implementation of SAP in 2009, where there was a lot of, at the last minute, cutting of corners and all the rest of it, as Andy was describing, which brought in bespoke, bastardised code. And the problem with that is that then it's very difficult to update it and upgrade it later on, and you back yourself into very expensive corners. So it's my personal opinion that we will end up going over budget on this. I think the contingency will probably cover most of that off because it was a healthy contingency. But we will end up going over budget on this. But the very, 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 very last thing we should do is to try and make false savings during implementation in order to try and cover that off. Because if we're concerned about what it will cost our taxpayers, trust me, it will cost an awful lot more putting it right later if we don't get it right at the outset, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that, John, and Andy as well. But I just feel that we do need to have some positive news to sell to our taxpayers at the end of the day, because this sort of thing can just run away from us at next year with the financial climate that is forecast. And the message I'm getting on the street is we should not be making all these expenses at the moment because people just can't afford it anymore.
Defend the executive of Wiltshire Council here, Chair, because I may be sat this side today, but trust me, but the reality is first of all, I suspect most residents of Wiltshire have no idea what the Evolve programme is or what it's costing. If they were aware of what it would cost us not to do Evolve, then they'd be damn glad we're making that investment, because the continuation of the old accounting SAP system and the costs that there would have been in being able to continue to use that system with our modern infrastructure and the upgrades that we required far outweigh the costs of implementing the new Oracle system. But the other thing I would say to you, Chris, and I think, it's right that we think about things like the NHS IT systems that have gone so horribly wrong and all of that. But the very fact that we're having this conversation at this stage in its implementation is the reason why I have confidence that it won't be running away from us in a year's time, because actually scrutiny is in there. We are being told up front and centre what the challenges are, what the problems are. In all honesty, I've been surprised at the degree of openness and transparency that we've had, because they could have got away with not doing it. I'm delighted they are being as honest as they are, but they could have got away with not doing it, because we all know that, when it comes to these super techie things, none of us are experts in it. And I think that degree of transparency, that being upfront, and that willingness to work with members to say, here's the solutions we're looking at, what do you think? And they have taken on board comments that have come through from Scrutiny earlier in the programme and at this stage. So I'm confident that we do have our finger on the pulse. I'm confident that we do know what's happening. I'm not confident exactly what the solution will be, but I'm confident there will be one, and it will be a reasonable one.
Thanks, John. Final word from Ruth.
Thank you. Yeah, just to reiterate what John has said, what I would say is that actually the cost of not going through this is far greater than actually going through it. Like any transition, there is a period of pain. But I think the fact that the board has tried to get on board users of the service from all of the services is a testament. And yes, I'm disappointed that there has been slippage. I am not surprised that there has been slippage, but we are keeping a track of it. And actually, we say we are as a task group, but actually the senior officers are as well. So it's not as though we're fighting against a tide coming in the opposite direction. We're not being canutes, but so yeah, thank you.
So I think it's appropriate to thank the task group, actually, obviously, for the great deal of work that they're doing. So very well done there. And if I may, Perry, whilst the directory has nothing to do with Evolve, it's probably more relative to tomorrow's meeting, the customer experience. If I was to be polite and say that the directory could be adjusted to reflect who actually works in Wiltshire Council, that would be a huge asset. Because when I look, I still find people who have left, and it's very difficult. I do understand it's a moving feast, but did you want to comment on that? Sorry.
Well, just to say thank you for your comments, and we'll pick that up as part of the work.
Okay, super. Thanks very much. Okay, then we're going to move on, if we may, then to the financial planning task group. And we've said a lot about this, but I've made some notes to say, so I'm going to run through these, and then we'll move into Pip and Gavin, who will give us an overview of anything else that they wish to add. This task group hasn't had a formal meeting in September, but since September rather, but I've already mentioned, and we will meet again next Friday, and all members of this committee will be invited to join. And of course, they're as busy as always behind the scenes, the task group. In addition, the chairman and vice chairman of the task group have scheduled meetings with the chairman and vice chairman of the select committees to discuss relevant parts of the council's Q1 revenue and capital reports. These will be used to identify potential areas for financial scrutiny of services in the coming months. Finally, I'd like to welcome, or I'm sure Pip will, that Councillor Mark Vervinnen has joined the task group. And I would like to thank George Jeans for all the work that he did on the task group. And just come now to Pip or Gavin. Is there anything else you'd like to add from the work you've been busy doing, mainly from home? Pip, and thank you for being so diligent with that in your recent illness. Thank you.
Can you just confirm to me that you have already agreed that Councillor Ian Thorne joins the task group?
Yes, we did.
I
we
missed
did
that meeting. Right, thank you.
Do we formally, actually, that's a good point. Do we formally? Yes, we're doing that, yes. So it's in the proposal. We are formally doing all of that, yeah. But Ian is already, at the last meeting, Ian was agreed to be part of it.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to check. Right. No, I have nothing further to add. We have obviously a lot of work ahead of us. The thing I would say about Evolve is that is a typical one that you will take as ONS via John. That won't go through the financial planning task group because it's too long, too intricate. And obviously I can rely on John and Andy to report back to you the financial implications. So I don't think that's something we need to take on board. I'm happy to be corrected. But other than that, I'm happy to propose that we thank George for his work on the task group and welcome Councillor Verbinnen, who is representative of the one committee we don't have, which is children's.
Okay, thank you very much, Pip. Gavin, did you want to add anything? Okay, fine. So I'll go to a proposal, if I may, then. Any questions? Yes. I haven't proposed it yet. You don't know what I'm going to say, surely. Right. To note the update on activity provided, to remove Councillor Georgines from the membership of the Financial Planning Task Group with thanks to him and for his contribution to the task group's work, and to add Mark Bavinen to the membership of the Financial Planning Task Group. Do I have a second to Chris? Thank you. All those in favour, please. Thank you. Anybody against? No, that's carried then. Thank you very much. Okay, let's move on then to socially responsible procurement policy. That's a mouthful in itself, isn't it? Procurement. From page 27 of the agenda pack, we have a report that makes proposal to support the introduction and adoption of the socially responsible procurement policy in the council's procurement process. These proposals will be considered by Cabinet on the 29th of November. So here's an opportunity for actually get something ahead of Cabinet, which is excellent. Here to introduce the report, we are joined by, and I think Joanna is on, you're on screen at the moment. You're going to be running through. Helen Jones is not well today. Andy Brown is here, and Councillor, the Cabinet member, Councillor Nick Bottle, is here. So I think we'll move straight into the presentation, if we may, and then we'll take. Sorry, Andy, did you want to? Yeah. Sorry, my apologies. That's fine. I'll take that as a slap on the wrist. Continue on because we can see it all, but people will be able to hear it, not actually see the slides. So that's just an IT issue we'll address.
Okay, thanks, Chair. No wrist slaps here. It was more a case of I was just doing an introduction, and I will hand over to the expert, Luana, who's been putting this policy together. If we can go to the next slide. So we've got a quick presentation to take you through, but obviously you've got in the pack the report, the draft report that's going to Cabinet. There may be some tweaks and changes, but that in generally will be the report that goes to Cabinet, and the appendix obviously attached, which is the policy. So this policy's been in the midst for a number of months in terms of formation. And it's really putting a framework together, and the recognition that the fact that we don't have a policy around social responsible procurement. That's not to say that we don't do it, of course. So that when we have significant contracts that we undertake and renew or go out to tender, that we do have a consideration when we're looking at the cost and quality ratio, which we, of course, will still have going forward, that within the quality aspect of that consideration of that tender, there is, for those significant contracts, a consideration, and certainly that has been put into the quality scoring. But what this policy now does is that for all tenders that we undertake, that there is consideration and there's mindfulness in terms of when we undertake that quality aspect, that there will be a percentage given to the social responsible qualities that you see within the policy, and that therefore brings together the process in terms of what we are planning to take. Now, you could argue that we could have had this policy in for some time. You can see there in terms of the dates, legislation-wise, when this should have come in. So it came into force way back in January 2013. And so that's just a nod to the fact that we, in some procurements and some contracts, that we have been doing this, but we haven't, as I said, had a formal policy that says this is what we are going to do. And certainly you can see from the policy, and expecting a debate here in terms of some of the content, because you could look at it and say, could we go further on some aspects and you'll see the 5 themes that we've got in terms of putting Wiltshire first, some of the green economy and sustainable environment aspects, and depending on your scale and where you are in some of those aspects, about you may have a particular view about how far this council wants to go or could go. What I would say to it, and we might get into that conversation, is obviously this has to be balanced out in terms of that other aspect, which is the cost side of things as well. So when you're undertaking a procurement, there is a cost and quality ratio that we will look at, particularly with the social responsible policy. We are talking about the quality side and the things that we'll now see going forward. The last bit I want to talk about is how this will then be delivered, because what you've got here is a policy, but we are then talking about a toolkit. So I think we had a conversation earlier in the meeting around the financial limit of when that will come to Financial Planning Task Group, a contract. And it's the same kind of aspect here, is that these toolkits will need to be tailored to those categories. Those social care, packages of care are different to undertaking resurfacing of roads. So the toolkit and what you can then therefore get out of that contract from a social responsibility angle needs to be taken into consideration. But there are potentially some things in that toolkit that we could put in to say we expect a minimum to come forward from all contracts around that. Now, I'm not stating what that should be, but there is a potential in terms of how we deliver that policy. We could expect a commitment from those contractors to deliver certain aspects, whether that is on our care levers, whether that is on a commitment to the green economy. There's certain things that we could put in that we would then expect a contractor to provide. But at the moment, those toolkits are the next stage. This is the policy. You've got the 5 themes, and Luana will take you through those in terms of the development of that policy. But then critically, there is going to be a how, and then how we form those toolkits going forward. So that's just an overview from me, Chair. Happy to hand over to Luana to take you through the rest of the presentation.
Thanks very much, Andy. And in actual fact, Ben has cured the IT glitch, so everything is now going out on the webcast as well. Okay, we need to bring Luana in to complete. Over to you, Luana.
Good morning. Thank you, Andy. So like Andy said, I'm just going to talk you through the 5 key themes and how we arrived at these themes. The council has responsibility to manage public money with probability, to ensure that value for money is achieved, and to manage it in such a way that the wider council objectives can be supported. The council's business plan principles set an increased focus on the delivery of social, economic, environmental, and cultural well-being, including in the way in which we manage our procurement activity. The 5 key priorities of the socially responsible procurement policy are driven by the 4 guiding missions set out in the council's business plan. Next slide, please, Henry. This policy places particular focus on the 3 national procurement drivers, which are creating new business, new jobs and new skills, tackling climate change and reducing waste, improving supplier diversity, innovation and resilience. By linking these outcomes to Wiltshire Council's missions, we can clearly visualise the impact of the 5 key priorities will have on achieving the council's vision. Individual ways of achieving this are detailed within the delivery aims of the policy. Next slide, please, Henry. Thank you. Each theme describes our priority and how we aim to deliver this through our procurement activity. A Wiltshire First approach focuses on SMEs and local businesses and how we build trust, provide transparency and visibility to local suppliers, provide training to improve skills and access to our opportunities, implement improved tender opportunities such as lotting to improve their access to higher value contracts, standardise our processes, simplify our procedures and processes in line with national policy guidance. Local training and employment focuses on how we will work with our business partners to encourage them to create more opportunities for apprenticeships, work placements and jobs, especially for vulnerable people and care leavers. Partners in the community focuses on how we and our suppliers can help and support the health and well-being of our communities and promote diversity, inclusion, equality and fair targeting effort towards those in greatest disadvantage and tackle deprivation across the country. Apologies. Green economy and sustainable environment focuses on how sustainable procurement policies and processes, which we will follow to exploit the opportunity to reduce emissions in line with national priorities in order to reduce our carbon footprint, minimise energy consumption, waste, pollution, reduction of greenhouse gas emissions and detrimental natural environmental impacts. Ethical procurement and wellbeing focuses on how we will tackle safeguarding and promote the rights of children, young people and vulnerable adults and ensure we practice ethical procurement. Next slide, please, Henry. Here are some examples of what we anticipate the qualitative benefits will be for Wiltshire by adopting this policy. I'll hand back to Andy, who will go on to the next slide.
Thanks, Lana. Just to finish off on governance and reporting then. So it's just to say that the implementation, the implementation of the policy will be overseen through the commercial board. So I chair that commercial board. Perry's on that board as well. But the portfolio holder is also in attendance at that commercial board as well. So once the policy is approved and the toolkit or toolkits rather are set up for those contracts going forward, there'll be an aspect of then beginning to report back on some of the indicators and metrics that come through on the social value aspect of our procurement. So if we are setting, for example, number of apprentices being appointed through our contracts, then we can report through on that. And we can also put that into the contractual documentation. So that is a requirement for the contractors to report on the success or not in terms of measuring the commitments that they've been asked to do through their contract and through this policy as well. So, for example, then we can talk around how much carbon reduction that they've been able to achieve through their contract as well. So that will all be put into practice as part of this policy in terms of the delivery as well. And we'll look to report that through either through the performance report or the finance report in terms of some of the aspects of the metrics that are being put through as a result of the policy coming into being. I think happy to sort of open it up to questions. I'm sure there'll be quite a few debates, but I don't know if Nick wanted to add anything at this point.
I was just going to ask, does Nick want to come in at this point or just on questions?
Well, I'll help on questions. But look, I mean, I think, my first impression or first sort of concerns maybe when looking at something like this is there are clearly some positive intended outcomes. But, what's the downsides? What's the, are there additional costs, which would mean that we would end up delivering poorer value for taxpayers' money? Will there be additional bureaucracy of process? Would it lead to more box ticking rather than any meaningful impact? Could it actually end up with the range of suppliers and contractors being reduced because, of course, it's only the usual suspects who've got their in-house teams who can often deliver, the required bureaucracy. So I had all those sorts of concerns. Of course, that last one is contrary to one of the aims of the National Procurement Strategy, which is to increase the supply of potential contractors. Those are the sort of concerns I had coming to this. But I'm assured that actually this is not going to do that. Yes, Mr. Brown has alluded to there will be some extra cost, always is. But the benefits of drawing together these things, some of which we're already doing anyway because we have to, and embedding the business plan objectives, that has benefits, has cost benefits as well. So I'm persuaded that this is a reasonable approach that we're taking here, and that those potential downsides that I have gone through will not be the case. So that, I'm happy with what you're seeing before you now.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Well, oddly enough, those 5 issues were my 5 issues I had written down, and I could see everybody round the table going, yeah, that's the one I was going to ask. So I wonder if we could get a response, I'm not trying to stifle debate here, but is it fair to say that most of those were, everybody is nodding and going, yeah, that's exactly what we were concerned in. Can you give us some confidence, Andy, that they are not going to come to pass? Yeah, I was going to come to all the others, John, but rather than spend 10 minutes going around the room, if we address all those now, then we can address the others that are there. Is that okay, Andy, please?
Yes, sorry, I'll try to cover those off, but by all means, chip in at any one point and when you hear some of the responses. So in terms of tick box and bureaucracy, we're not increasing the size of the procurement and commissioning team in doing this. So I've not gone to Cabinet and asked for an increase in resources. It was made fairly clear to me by the Cabinet member about how we want to undertake this, and I think therefore the approach reflects that. There could be a potential uplift in cost in contracts by going down this route, but it depends how far the council wants to go down. So if you started to put in to cost ratio analysis of procurements that you wanted 60% of quality, 40% of price, because under the quality you wanted to see more apprenticeships, you wanted to see contractors therefore reducing their carbon footprint. Well, that doesn't come for free. You have to then pay for that through your contracts. But then that lends itself to the other question as well, as around if you therefore go down that route, does that restrict the number of suppliers? And ultimately, it will. Not every supplier is set up to operate in that way as well. And there's aspects within the policy that therefore have to be balanced out, because if we're taking a Wiltshire first approach, where I do want to see more of our contracting go to local SMEs, you have to have that balance. But that's then when the toolkits come into play. There are some contracts whereby the benefits that you would get out of applying some of the things that we talked about around apprenticeships and carbon reduction, if we are talking about supplies of paper clips or paper and so on and so forth, there is a limitation about what benefits can come through. So we've got to be a bit smart in terms of those toolkits. But some of the concerns that have been raised, and no doubt are here, are going to be predicated, I think, about how we then apply the toolkit going forward. And it's going to be around that cost and quality ratio. From my perspective, there is an affordability question. So I would, personally, if it was my way, I would have a cost ratio of 90-10 in favour of cost. But that is not, I can see I can see a few faces. But that's not. Luckily, there is a commercial board that says actually this is the right way forward. And of course, we have a policy going forward that is clearly saying these are some of the things that we would expect to come through on a procurement. So we will have that debate from officers, but there is also quite clearly a steer from politically about how we would want that to go forward. What's the ambition in terms of this policy and setting that in practice for the contracts that are going to come down the line? If we wanted to be ambitious from a social responsible perspective, then I'd be getting feedback now that says we want to see within these toolkits going forward a set amount to go towards that quality ratio around reduction in carbon, around care levers, around apprenticeships and local skills. But we do have to balance that out within the affordability. So I don't know if that raises fears or allays fears in terms of what I've just said, but there are some concerns. I'm less concerned around the bureaucracy and the reporting aspects, because this is something we have to do. The procurement and commissioning team aren't increasing in size, but they're just reprioritising their focus in terms of what is required under this policy. There will be a debate to be had, certainly I'm having that with the director and the team, about our focus on procurements, so that rather than being involved in every procurement, we may, going forward, have to focus our efforts on the bigger procurements and set a framework for budget managers to actually conduct the activity under their contracts going forward, to say, this is the support that we will provide from a procurement perspective, and this is what is your expectations from a budget manager perspective. But the implementation of Oracle is a key factor to that in terms of being able to go out and undertake a successful procurement.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I've got John who wants to come in, and I know that we've also got, sorry, did Joe want to come in, did you say? Oh, sorry, Gordon. Well, do you want to go first then? Joe, I didn't see you sign. Sorry, Joe.
That's fine. And thank you for the presentation. And some of what I was going to ask, actually, you covered, Andy, but I would still come back to that. The award criteria balance is what's, becomes very, very important. So it doesn't really matter how many questions and tick boxes and bureaucracy you ask of others, so your suppliers and potential suppliers, having been someone who's been on the other side, where the tick box is this big and the criteria is 5%. So it is understanding so it isn't a tick box exercise for us. If we're going to do it, then we need to really think about, how that provides advantage and benefit into our communities from a full perspective. If we're not planning on making any changes whatsoever to the award criteria, then there is part of me that would ask whether we're really gaining any additional benefit at all. And when it comes to that, so first I'm working with lots of SMEs, then again, that is helping support them in growing and understanding those additional areas that are important when it comes from, delivering value into the community. So, so waddling around the piece, but it really does come back to that, the practical application of weighted criteria. There's no change to that, then you are just adding an additional tick box bureaucracy for suppliers and companies.
Thank you, Joe. We'll take all the questions, if that's okay. Gordon, you've got a question.
Well, I've got a comment and then a question, maybe. My comment really is that I do support this quite passionately, actually, because, I spent a lot of time in 2013, through 2013 and 2015, inquiring as to why we can't use the resources that we give out in contracts to promote benefits for our communities, not least in the employment and training of young people, in the letting of apprenticeships. John will remember that, because it was thing, and I was consistently told that all of this wasn't possible. But nevertheless, I did persist, knowing that primary legislation had been passed. So I'm particularly pleased that it's taken some time, but this has finally come back to the table. But nevertheless, the measurement of impacts, whether they're good or bad, is the essence of good scrutiny. And it really is, because impacts and benefits are that innocence, and we want to know really how these measures are going to be taken, how transparent they're going to be, and how we're going to be able to have visibility of those measurements. Will it be through our select committees, or will it be back to this committee, or through some other channel? But nevertheless, will we get visibility of those measures once they've been put together? Because it is the essence of good scrutiny.
Thank you, Gordon. John, and then we'll ask Andy and Tony after.
Thank you, Chair. It follows on nicely from Gordon to an extent, to be honest with you. It's a lovely document, nice, pretty pictures in it to make it easy to read and understand, but it actually doesn't tell us very much. And that's because a little bit like the business plan, that was a nice, pretty document with lots of little pictures in it to help us understand. The essence is in all the supporting documents that will go with it that we've not yet had sight of. We haven't had sight of them for the business plan. We haven't had sight of them for this. So this makes some words towards young people, which would automatically be my, what am I looking at? But there's nothing in here that actually tells me what even could be the benefit to young people or care leavers, let alone what will be the benefit to young people or care leavers. There's nothing in here that tells me what will be the requirement for social responsibility in our communities, let alone what could be the requirement for social responsibility in our communities. So basically, all this document really does is use 12 pages or whatever to use colourful pictures to say, we'd like to buy better. But it actually doesn't, I'm really sorry, but this doesn't tell me in any way how we are going to buy better, what we are going to do about it, when we are going to do something about it, what are the timescales for it, what are the requirements for it, and absolutely crucially, as Councillor King just said, how are we going to measure both what we ask for and the impact of it? And it really worries me that what we've got something here could be an ever nice shiny policy that can sit on a shelf and we can dust it off occasionally and show it to people to say what a wonderful and compassionate organisation we are. But actually, I'm really sorry, there's nothing in this where I can look at it and say, this is going to be the impact of adopting this policy. This is going to be the impact to our residents of it. This is the opportunity it is offering to our care leavers. Well, this is someone phoning up to tell me to shut up. This is going to be the impact to our care leavers or our young people or our vulnerable adults or whatever in our community. And this is how we're going to see that. There's just nothing there. It's empty. I'm sorry, but it is.
Tony.
Thanks, Chair. I had a relatively simple question, which was, is there a metric for social value? So social value is claimed to be one of the outputs. And if there's a metric, I'd like to understand what that might be. And then just as a little nitpick, practice as a noun rather than as a verb. And I think it's supposed to be a verb. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Pip, did you want to come in, and then I'm going to get Andy to
Yes, I'm in
reply.
danger today of agreeing almost entirely with John. That can't be right, John, but never mind. We've always had interest. The thing that worries me about this is it is very altruistic, because the one thing I worry about is it limits choice. from whom we can go out to. If you put all these 5 things together, there are going to be a lot of companies in Wiltshire, and I already know some in adult social care, who just say, we won't quote. And that is worrying in a way if it's over prescriptive, but do you just say, well, we've tried a Wiltshire first, so we'll go elsewhere, or do we stick to the tired old system we've got already? So that would be my one point. And the other is, for residents, we do have to be aware of value for money. And again, you've got to have something to base that on. So without, whenever they have a contract, whether it's in children's or environment or anything like that, somewhere there's got to be a cost benefit analysis, so that you have real choice, as opposed to this is what we've negotiated. They tick 4 of the 5 boxes and we'll go with it. But it's just too altruistic with not enough detail as far as I'm concerned. But luckily I won't. Well, of course, we will have some of them coming via financial planning, which we can then ask the questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Pip. Jerry would like to ask a question.
Thanks, Chair. I have every sympathy with the officers here. You prepare a report, okay, glossy or whatever it is. If you were to drive into the detail, you'd probably end up writing about 1,000, 2,000 pages of exactly what we want. And how would we then digest that? I mean, I sympathise with John and Pip, but you get to a point where, well, we have to rely on our officers. We have to have trust in the officers. They can deliver what we want. We ask the questions. And relating to what Pip said about contractors not wanting to tender or bid for it, I was on holiday about 5 years ago and sat with a guy from Channel 4 by accident who did dispatches. And I asked him to go away and see if he had time to look at how does it, we always have to have approved contractors that do a lot of our main jobs. And then you ask them, and I've had, where I work in the industry, people say, well, why can't we apply for a tender for this sort of job and that? And I know that from the experience of the new campuses and leisure centres that were built. It was only X amount of people that could really apply, and we're taking all of our local businesses away from being able to deliver that. But I could see, you think, why does that cost X amount of £1 million to be done? Yet you could get your local builder to do it half the price and probably the same standard. But the word approved is probably all to do with health and safety and how it's all delivered. It's got to be ultra safe. But yeah, so yes, the document is there. We've seen it and we have to rely on our officers. But I said, it could be thousands of pages, getting the answers to what we want. So it is a reasonable document. It could do more, but don't get yourself into the thing where you've got a book of pages which you can't digest and read.
Thank you. Pip, you've still got your mic on, please.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Okay, before I ask Andy to answer those questions, or anybody else who'd like to add in, I think it's fair that we build into a proposal today that we follow this up in some way, shape or form to find out what the actual impact of this is going to be, rather than for us just to note it. I know that we will make comments to Cabinet, obviously, but I think that we need to be looking to the future of this one. It's typically what we should be doing as an Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, in my opinion. And so I think that, Chris and I need to, as a bare minimum, go away and look at how we could do that and the way we should do it, get Henry to bring it back on an agenda item so that we can see this, how this moulds into a working policy, as it were, as opposed to just, it's on paper. So, Andy, would you, or anybody else, would you like to summarise our questions and give us some answers? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take all the positive feedback and reflect on what I've heard. So at the start, I did set this out as a framework. I accept glossy policy, empty to a certain extent, because I did explain that the toolkits will come to give you the metrics and how we're going to apply this policy. We could have, as officers, ignored the Act, not put a policy together, and left it down to the individual contract managers and budget managers to apply any sort of social value criteria going forward. What this policy will do straight away, once approved, is put social value in as 10% in terms of tenders going forward. That's then on top of the cost and quality criteria. So this will begin to change the landscape in how we do business with our contractors going forward. We do need a policy because we can't ignore the Act. If someone was to come and ask us, what is our policy? We haven't got one. Now, the questions that I'm then hearing about, it's empty, what's the weighted criteria? So that will begin to change the dial on the weighted criteria. The metrics will come with the toolkits, and I think you're probably getting a steer of where you want this scrutiny to be going forward in terms of those toolkits. But when that contract comes up, it will be for that individual service to decide what level of metrics they want to put in that service specification going forward. The toolkit can set in and say, as a minimum, we're expecting this in the social, from a social responsible value perspective. The service can go forward, can go further. It's their contract, they can put that in. And indeed, again, select committees can, if they have particular interest, can look at that contract to say what they're getting out of it and get that reported back. But from this policy perspective, once we begin to put those toolkits in, we can get the reporting metrics out. They will come to commercial board, and they will also then go on to cabinet on a quarterly basis as well, so that we can get reporting on it. But that will then ask some of the questions around the empty aspects, because I can't give you the metrics yet because we haven't necessarily put together the toolkits. They'll be done over the next couple of months, but also it will be dependent on those individual contracts that come forward about how far those contracts and the services want to go in putting those metrics in. So if it's a particular contract that you want to see aspects of around a social aspect being put forward, then it will be at the point of specification. And that goes back to the debate earlier about at what point do select committees want to be involved in contracts, because it'll be that type of thing that you determine to be put in. So this is a stage along the journey. This is a policy, putting that in, putting that into place. It will change some of the criteria immediately in terms of social value. As a minimum, we'll be expected to have 10%, and then we talk about cost and quality. So yes, I was flippant in my 90-10 aspect, because not least you would expect that from a finance person, but that is the reality is for the council to put that forward, is this will change it. It will put 10% in for social value, and then there's a conversation to be had around cost and quality as well. There's then a question about how we set the minimums for a toolkit, and we're having those debates now. What do we expect to see in those minimums from the toolkits? Then you apply those toolkits to the contracts that come up. Then you can have a further conversation about what metrics you want to see reported out of that contract going forward. So that detail around the emptiness of this policy, that detail will come through the toolkits. So I understand the apprehension here in terms of wanting to see the detail, but that detail will come in after the policy has been approved, and we can put together the minimum what we would expect to see in the toolkit, and then you will begin to see that rolled out as contracts are renewed and let as well.
Thanks, Andy. Are we happy for, Nick, would you like to come in?
I think Mr. Brown said it far more eloquently than I would, but I would just challenge the view that going down the overly detailed route and prescription, heavy prescription in a policy is the best way to go, because I just don't think a great weighty tome, which, you know, you would plough through endless amounts of detail, actually, practically, that would render it pretty useless and full of unintended consequences and you know, far off the mark of all those things that I said were concerns would all become far bigger concerns. So I don't think, you know, that's the way forward, as the procedures have been outlined by Andy. You know, clearly this is this is a moving feast. Mutatis mutandi, and you know, I think we are embarking on a journey, and this policy is the first stage of that. But you know, the degree to which certain aspects get pursued will depend on, you know, the whole of the panoply of scrutiny and backwards and forwards of the decisions that we make over the coming few years.
Okay, I'm hoping that the proposal I'm about to put forward will encompass everybody's feelings, and if it doesn't, I'm happy to debate and change this. So I'm going to put a proposal forward, and we'll see whether it fits the bill. To note the proposed introduction of a socially responsible procurement policy in the council's procurement processes, which will be determined by Cabinet on the 29th of November 22, along with the associated toolkit, delivery plan and social value impact reporting system. To ask the Chair and Vice Chair to investigate further how the impacts of the social responsibility procurement policy will be measured, evaluated and made available for scrutiny discussion. Yes, John.
You knew my hand was going to go up because you were looking.
I looked at you for a friendly amendment, hopefully. Yeah.
Well, first of all, can I actually say I think we should welcome the introduction of a social responsibility policy. It may not be what we'd all want to see as perfect yet, but it's a hell of a lot better than nothing. But the other one that I was going to do is I think that certainly my concerns on this hinge on what is going to be in these toolkits. So I wonder if, and Andy or Perry might be able to advise us on this, is when we're going to see those toolkits, because what would be better, I would have thought, would be if we could, as the second part of our resolution, schedule in those toolkits either coming back to this committee or to a rapid scrutiny to look at them in order for us to be able to see whether they do add that depth. I take on board, Nick, the points you make about not wanting to fetter the policy with too much detail, but the opposite is also true, that if you have a policy without any supporting matrices to measure against, then you can just have people pay lip service to it. So we need something to measure against. So if we've got those coming back at some point and we can put a time scale to that, and we can say, and scrutiny will look at them, I think that would be a positive way forward for everybody.
Okay, I've added at the moment a third, which is to agree that further scrutiny input will take place on the socially responsible procurement toolkit. And that's obviously something that Chris and I will look at. So
Can I just ask a question there, Chair? Just to the officers, would that create a monster of work
to
be delivered in time? Because if we're going to pass this, I don't want to put them under that unnecessary pressure on that being too much work at this stage when we're developing this policy.
You know, I think the policy is going to Cabinet, and this is just a requirement for us to look at the toolkit to make sure that, you know, and perhaps we can actually add value to it, which is really what we're looking at. But I could see Andy wanted to say something, and I'm happy for you to comment before we agree and go to a vote. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I set the team a deadline of 6 months to get the toolkit in, probably a couple of months back. I think the criticality is that, and Councillor Hubbard's alluded to it, and Councillor Frigg about, those toolkits are key, really, in fact, of what metrics we're being asked. You might not see the metrics because they're going to be unique to each contract, but you'll get an idea of how we're shaping and how this policy is coming to life, which has been some of the debate this morning. So I think we can't avoid but not bring the toolkit back here to say this is what we are planning. Certainly, I've got things in my head in terms of what I see as mandatory to be put in, and certainly certain things about range of other aspects that you could see in a contract and certainly everyone will then have their own views. Just to pick up on Jerry's point, I don't think the toolkit will be of a size, because it's leaning on the detail, but we can certainly bring it back here in the new year once it's finished, or rather draft, because it will be an input from the scrutiny committee so I'm more than happy to do that, because it is going to be critical in terms of how we enact the policy going forward.
Okay, thanks, Andy. I'm comfortable. I would like to read the whole proposal, if I may, because we've made a few changes. So that'd be okay with everybody. So it now reads, to welcome the proposed introduction of a socially responsible procurement policy in the Council's procurement process, which will be determined by Cabinet on the 29th of November 22, along with the associated toolkit, delivery plan, and social value impact reporting system. 2, to ask the Chair and Vice Chair to investigate further how the impacts of the socially responsible procurement policy will be measured, evaluated and made available for scrutiny discussion. And 3, to agree that further scrutiny input will take place on the socially responsible procurement toolkit in 2023. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Chris. All those in favour? Anybody against? No? Okay, that's fine. Thank you all very much. And thank you, Luana, as well, for being there for the presentation. And we'll now move on to agenda item 9, which is our forward work programme. To receive updates from the chairs and vice chairs of the select committees, we do this at every meeting. So I'm going to ask John Hubbard, can you give us a brief update? No, sorry, John, a full update on Children's Select Committee, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And you've got the forward work plan in the agenda packs. You might notice we've slightly changed the format of the children's forward work plans. What we've tried to do is to break it down slightly to make it easier to follow the work that's happening. So you've got one that shows forward work plan for our current and active task groups, which you'll see there. And then one for the actual select committee's work. Sorry, then one for consideration by our new standing task group, which is doing some more in-depth stuff on some of the annual reports that come to us, and then one, hopefully, yes, on our standard committee work. So we've just done this in a way of trying to make it easier to follow the work that's going on. Just some headlines for you, if I may. We've got a whole raft of task groups that are up and running or about to get up and running now. And thank you to everybody who has volunteered for those. The one task group we are still looking for members on, and we haven't really had much response to, is our Getting to Outstanding task group, which was looking at the work that the officers are putting in towards looking at our next Ofsted inspection being an outstanding inspection. So still some opportunities for engagement there if anybody was interested. Otherwise, all of the other groups that you see in your forward work plan in the agenda have now been filled, and we have people doing those. So thank you very much, everybody, for that. So I think beyond that, I could go on for hours about all the stuff that's happening, but I'll open for any questions. Or one thing I will say, I've got to be very careful with my wording this. You'll remember when I was here at our last meeting, I said that we'd been rather robust with the report that we had from CAMS. We had CAMS come back and represent to us and had a very different style of report from them that was much more positive, although the committee was then more negative about some of the internal procurement. That will be coming back to our next meeting again, I am fairly certain. I've been contacted by at least one of the providers who we discussed at that meeting, saying that the procurement report the committee received bore very little relevance to the procurement reports that they send in. And we have some meetings about that coming up. So
Thank you very much, John. Any questions of Children's Select? Oh, okay, thanks very much. Could you do your mic, please, John? Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
No, not at all. Johnny Kidney, Health Select, anything you want to add other than your report, please, John?
Yeah, you've got the forward work programme there in front of you, dated 24th of October. So there have been some additions to that. We had our most recent meeting, the Health Select Committee, on the 1st of November. There is an item we are adding into our forward work programme on the back of that, which relates to a report we had at the November meeting on winter preparedness and a control room that's been established in Chippenham to help relieve pressure on the ambulance service. So we've requested a specific update on that at a future meeting. There's also in the pack there just some information on rapid scrutiny exercise on market sustainability plan, which is taking place over 2 meetings in December. We also undertook a rapid scrutiny exercise on new health and overview and scrutiny guidance, which we reported to the meeting on the 1st of November. The other item, just to draw your attention to, is the system-wide inquiry day that we are looking to hold. It has been delayed somewhat just due to officer pressures, but we also don't want it to coincide with winter pressures that a lot of our stakeholders will be experiencing during the winter. So I anticipate that probably will take place early 2023, rather than in the depths of winter. But work is ongoing to prepare for that. So that's it from me, unless there are any.
Okay. Do we have any questions? Yes, John.
Thank you. Yeah, Johnny, are you intending at any point at looking at NHS estate? There's in Melksham we've got the hospital, which is 30% used estate-wise, if at all. And we've got things like old nurses' homes that are increasingly becoming more and more of a wreck that could be turned into perfectly good family homes. And we keep being told the NHS is going to look at this. There's a review happening. There's a buildings review happening, but nothing ever comes back. And we just see more and more and more decent buildings becoming more and more dilapidated.
I should declare an interest in my professional life. I do a bit of work with NHS estates on redevelopment of disused redundant. Yeah. Absolutely not. It's certainly something I'd be happy to make inquiries on and see if we can get an update from NHS Property Services on that.
Okay, thanks, John. Good question. Thank you very much. Yes, Tony.
Just as a point of order, really, NHS Property Services is really quite different from the NHS. So there are different bodies at work here. Thank you.
No pun intended there, I guess. Right. Over then. Thank you very much, Johnny. Over to Jerry for Environment Select.
Thank you, Chair. So last week, on the 8th of November, the Select Committee met. We concentrated on a number of housing issues. And we heard about the Wiltshire Housing Development Partnership, which is focused upon developing new housing stock. We also received an update on the progress with Homeless Prevention Strategy Action Plan 2019 to 24. I'm on the committee, and I thank you all last week for putting in a great debate, because we uncovered a number of anomalies on that housing, whereas people are having houses sold from underneath them, council houses being sold, not being replaced in the right area. So, and all members contributed really well, and it was quite a thing to see that things that were going on in our housing associations and private rent and other things coming out. The committee is very aware of the pressures of the housing provision, though, in the county, and they're likely to increase over the years. So we'll continue to monitor this over the coming months. The Select Committee's task group, the Climate Emergency Task Group, continues to monitor progress on reaching our carbon targets by 2030. And then the Vice Chairman and I are also having ongoing discussions with relevant Cabinet members and officers about the Select Committee's forward work plan, which is in your pack for the coming 12 months. There are more meetings in the diary, but outcomes of the meetings which have occurred already are reflected in the current forward work programme. So we have had meetings to discuss spatial planning, climate change, heritage, arts and tourism, housing development and waste. And I am happy to answer any questions that any of the committee members might have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Jerry. Do we have any questions on Environment Select? We don't, okay. And I'll just an update from myself on the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee. The only extra bit that I would like to add is that I've been asked by a number of members and 6 area boards to look into how the council's local highways and footway improvement group, LHFIGS, can influence reviews of local speed limits and progressing agreed implementation LHFIG schemes. I will be meeting with a cabinet member and officers to discuss this. And as this falls within Environment Select, I'll be inviting Jerry and Bob to join us. Hopefully they can attend. And depending on how that meeting goes, an update or report will come to Environment Select Committee or perhaps some rapid scrutiny, however we decide, well, however Jerry decides it will go. Okay, do you have any questions in the Management Committee? No, in which case I'll go to a proposal, which is to note the updates of the Select Committee's activity and approve the Overview and Scrutiny Forward work programmes. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Chris. All those in favour? Anybody against? No, that's carried. Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the meeting. The date of the next meeting is the 24th of January 2022, and we have no urgent items. Must be 23. Must be 23. Even I noticed that one. Yeah, so it's 24th of January next year. Okay.